Imagine a 14th century infantry line. A formation is advancing towards you. Many are holding clubs with spiked balls. Your armor is an engineering masterpiece. Steel that can withstand a sword strike. Plates that distribute the force across the entire surface. You spent a fortune on it. And here is this man with a spiked club looking straight at you. And you understand that your armor may not save you. This is the Morning Star's main strength. Not its lethal power, not its penetrating ability, fear. Today we're examining weapons that appear primitive, but hide a whole story about how war changed, the feudal world collapsed, and a new era was born. Where did this name come from? Morgenstern. In German it means morning star. This name is a striking combination of poetry and horror. Medieval people loved to give weapons beautiful, almost mystical names. The Flemish called their polearms Guten Tag, good day. The Germans coined the morning star. The morning star's striking part, a metal ball with radiating spikes, truly resembled a stylized image of a star when viewed from the side. Those who received this ball on the helmet probably saw completely different stars. In German and Swiss lands, this name is recorded in written sources beginning in the 14th century. Interestingly, morgensterns served not only as a weapon, but also as an archaic form of morning greeting, roughly equivalent to good morning. The medieval sense of humor definitely deserves a separate study. Why the sword stopped working. To understand why the morning star appeared, one must understand what happened to European armor in the 14th and 15th centuries. The early Middle Ages was the era of chainmail. It provided excellent protection against slashing blows. A sword worked, the rings parted, and the blade reached the body. But gradually, everything changed. By the 15th century, a good knight's armor was a true engineering masterpiece. Solid forged cuirasses, shoulder pads, greaves, bassinet-style helmets with elongated visors. All of this transformed a heavily armored horseman into a living fortress. The sword, which until recently had decided the outcome of most skirmishes, now slid more and more often across the smooth steel, leaving only shallow scratches on it. This is why late medieval swords became less slashing and more thrusting. Knights tried to strike at the gaps in armor, the armpits, the visors, and the joints of the armor. Such precise combat required time and space. This was not always the case on the battlefield. Warfare gradually became mass. Swiss pikemen, German Landsknechts, urban militias. The mass soldier needed weapons that were cheap, simple, and capable of inflicting enormous kinetic damage. Thus was born the era of crushing weapons. What is it really? In popular culture, the morgenstern is always a ball and chain. This is how it is depicted in games and films. In fact, this is just one of the varieties, and far from the most common. The classic morning star, a wooden handle with a metal spiked head, stiff, predictable, controllable. The weapon's length ranges from 80 to 100 centimeters. The weight of the striking part alone ranges from 800 grams to 1.5 kilograms. There's a noticeable mass at the end of the lever. It was this combination of leverage and concentrated weight that determined the entire physics of combat use. The manufacturing technology was simple. If the striking part was made of iron, the spikes were simply welded on. If it was made of bronze or cast iron, steel spikes with thicker shanks were pressed into the heated pommel, and upon cooling, were firmly bonded to the metal. The cheapest option was a wooden club with iron spikes driven into it. It didn't last long, the wood would crack. But it was enough for 1 or 2 fights. It was precisely the simplicity of its manufacture that determined who used this weapon. Not just knights, professional soldiers, urban militias, peasants, those rebelling against the feudal lords. There were 3 levels of quality. The first is a well-made military weapon that was mass-produced by experienced gunsmiths for city arsenals. The second are simplified samples made by the militiamen or peasants themselves. The third is decorative morning stars inlaid with silver or gold. a symbol of power and wealth, which were never used in war. Impact physics. Now comes the most interesting part. What happened when the spike ball met the armor? The striking part weighs about 1 kilogram. The speed imparted to it by the lever during a good swing is several meters per second. The kinetic energy is significant, but the key parameter is the area over which this energy falls. The tip of the tenon is a fraction of a square millimeter. The pressure at the point of impact was so intense that the armor's metal simply couldn't withstand it. It deformed, it buckled, or it tore. Against chainmail, the spike pushed the rings apart and entered the body. Against armor, it worked differently. Even if the spike didn't pierce the metal, the impact energy was transferred through the armor to the body. And that's where the most destructive action began. Bone fractures without breaking the skin, ruptured internal organs, concussions. The Morning Star caused all this even without completely piercing the armor. It's like a modern bulletproof vest. A bullet might not penetrate the armor, but the impact can still break a rib or cause serious injury. And a blow to the head, at the right angle, could cause a traumatic brain injury that no helmet could protect against. Medieval chronicles also document the psychological impact. The mere realization that familiar armor might not protect against such weapons undermined morale. An army that lost confidence in its defense fought worse. A soldier who feared the enemy's weapons moved stiffly, made mistakes, and made decisions more slowly. Morgenstern gave its owner this advantage even before the fight began. The chained Morgenstern is scary but inconvenient. Ketten Morgenstern is a chain variant, the one everyone knows from movies and games. The spiked ball was attached to the handle via a chain. Essentially, it was a type of flail or combat weapon. The idea didn't come out of nowhere. Peasants often repurposed agricultural threshing flails as weapons, simply replacing the working part with an iron-bound cylinder. One important advantage was that the chain made it impossible to block the weapon with a shield. The ball simply curved around the obstacle and continued on toward its target. But the price for this was an almost complete loss of control over the trajectory. The chain made the strike unpredictable for both of them. Yes, it allowed them to evade the shield. However, control over the trajectory was greatly reduced. In close formation, this became a problem. One misplaced swing, and a soldier would hit a comrade. Moreover, the spikes often got stuck in shields, armor, and helmets. Pulling out a stuck Morning Star in the heat of battle was difficult, and those seconds of helplessness could cost lives. Finally, the weapon could strike back at its wielder. A poor swing and a heavy spiked ball would fly back. A certain amount of skill was required. That's why real armies often preferred more practical types of blunt weapons. Maces, picks, warhammers, rigid Morning Stars without chains. But it was the chain version that made the strongest psychological impact. The spinning ball with long spikes looked chaotic and almost bestial. Nightmare in the line. The Morgenstern had serious tactical limitations that are often forgotten. Let's start with carrying. Weapons studded with sharp spikes were impossible to sheathe. They snagged on clothing, gear, and cloaks. Special leather sheaths had to be used for transport. The extra weight meant extra time getting them ready for combat. Now the fight itself. For a blow to achieve destructive force, a good, sweeping swing was required. In close combat, with the enemy up close, there was practically no room to swing. The weapon became a useless piece of iron. Infantry of the 14th and 15th centuries fought shoulder to shoulder. Swinging a chainsword in such a crush meant a high probability of hitting one of your own. That's why vertical blows from above, were used almost exclusively in formation. But the vertical strike was also the most predictable. The opponent saw the swing and could try to dodge. All this meant that the Morning Star only revealed its potential in the right tactical context. Infantry operating in a prepared position, against attacking cavalry, with sufficient room to swing, it was there that he was deadly. The Hussites in the Battle of Courtrai. Two historical examples that show the morning star in real combat. The first was the Battle of Courtrai in 1302. It went down in history as the Battle of the Golden Spurs. Flemish urban militias, armed with primitive percussion weapons, defeated the French knightly cavalry. Relatively inexpensive polearms were capable of countering heavily armored horsemen. The second was the Hussite Wars, 1419 to 1434. Religious conflicts in Bohemia. The Czech radical wing, the Taborites, actively used flails and kettenmorgensterns. The Czech name for this weapon, kropak, stemmed from the similarity of the flail to the aspergillum used by priests to sprinkle holy water. When struck, blood sprayed in all directions. A grim irony for an era of religious wars. Hussite tactics were closely linked to the Wagenburg, a mobile fortification of linked wagons. When knightly cavalry attacked such a camp, the infantry met the riders with a hail of blows from long poles. The horses suffered terrible injuries. The riders were thrown from their saddles. On the ground, they were finished off with the same flails. Both examples show the main thing. The morning star was effective not by itself, but in the right tactical context. Weapons of social revolution. There is an important detail hidden here that is often overlooked. A morning star is not a knight's weapon. A good sword cost a fortune. Plate armor was even more expensive. Almost any blacksmith could make a morning star. It was a kind of symbol of the era in which the knightly monopoly on war was gradually being destroyed. If the early medieval knight felt almost invulnerable against poorly armed infantry, by the 15th century the situation had changed. Dense formations of pikemen, crossbowmen, halberdiers, soldiers with blunt weapons, they could destroy heavy cavalry. The battles of Morgarten, Crécy, Agincourt, they all showed that the era of the knight's absolute dominance was ending. In a sense, the morning star became a weapon of social revolution. A peasant with a club and spikes could kill a knight in armor worth an entire estate. Why he disappeared and why he returned. By the 16th century, the morning star began to disappear from the battlefield. The reason is simple and inexorable. Firearms. Arquebuses and muskets made heavy armor pointless. Plate armor began to thicken, then even more, but this led to increased bulk. At some point, further development of armor and weapons became pointless. By the 17th century, full-fledged knightly armor gradually disappeared from the battlefield. Along with it, many specialized types of blunt weapons disappeared. No heavy plate target, no need to carry a tool to destroy it. But Morgenstern's story did not end there. 3 centuries passed, and World War I broke out with its trench stalemate. On the Austro-Italian front, in the cramped trenches where hand-to-hand combat was possible, soldiers suddenly began crafting homemade close combat weapons. Among other things, primitive spiked clubs were used, Morgensterns of the new era. Weapons whose design spanned half a millennium were once again in demand as combat conditions approached those of the Middle Ages. Close quarters, surprise, hand-to-hand combat. Bottom line, how effective was the morning star? Against a heavily armed opponent with a good swing and a successful hit, the morning star was devastating. It accomplished precisely the task for which it was designed, piercing or crushing armor, disabling the enemy. But it had serious limitations. Its inertia required a swing in space. Its awkwardness in carrying made it cumbersome. The danger to friendly forces limited its use in formation. That's why the morning star never supplanted other weapons. It didn't replace the sword, spear, or halberd. It filled its niche, a specialized weapon against heavily armed opponents. It was the weapon of militias and rebels who needed a simple yet formidable weapon. Infantry weapons, not knightly. Ultimately, technological progress decided the fate of the morning star. When firearms brought an end to the era of plate armor, the morning star faded. But she managed to change the world. A peasant with a club and spikes killed the era of knights. If this story resonates with you, subscribe. The next episode is coming soon.